All right, so yeah, like I said, this is the first meeting of Psycho Alphabet Soup. This was an idea. I had the American Humanist Association sent out a thing and said, "How are you celebrating Pride?" And I was like, "Oh, we're doing a booth." And then I was like, "But that doesn't sound like enough. What else are we doing? We're putting together a new group." And I wanted to do like an LGBT and everybody else group for forever, with the hub and with the new management. Our new chair has really kind of whipped this place into order and given me time to do more things, which I'm loving. So I put together a little group. Tanya and Katie were there to help me for the first one. We've got other, Jeb, you were out of town, and Jerry, I know you wanted to go, but something happened. But anyway, we just got together and had a meeting at my place about what do we want this thing to be. And we still don't know. We wanted, I mean, my kind of thought is that we could have a topic, like we're going to talk about intersex tonight. Next month we're going to do polyamory 101. And so we've got, and in October we're going to do, it's National Coming Out Day. So we thought we'd have coming out stories. And so the reason I went with Alphabet Soup is that I don't want to limit this to just the L, the G, the B, and the T. I want it to be open to everybody. And explore just everyone's identity, whatever that is. You don't have to have any kind of special identity. If you identify as the norm, if there even is such a thing, that's fine too. That's something to explore. That's something to get, understand in your life. And I think understanding that diversity and that authenticity is what this is about. So what I'm hoping to do tonight is do my little presentation about intersex, and then I'm hoping we can have just kind of a free-for-all discussion about what we want to see here, what you're interested in. Do we want this to be kind of a support group where people can come and have that safe space to talk about whatever crap happens, what you're dealing with, who you're dealing with, what ignorant asshole said what, and why that made you mad, and how you didn't punch him but you should have. Or maybe we're going to become an advocacy group. Maybe we get out there and we talk about this stuff some more, and we spread some knowledge. Or we are like a social group where, we're a bunch of people who want to talk about all the variety and the differences and diversity there is in the world. So think about those things, if you will, and like I said, when I'm hoping not to bore you too much or anything on this, but we'll talk about that afterwards. Any questions before I get started? No? Okay. Well, I hope you all know me. I'm Kimberly. I'm pretty sure I know every single person in here. Again, the other thing I'll just say real quick is please do let people know about this. I think we could get a lot more new people in here, and I think it would be a really fun thing. So the presentation I'm going to do tonight is on what is intersex, and I kind of wanted to start the conversation, share a little bit of my own story, and just go through some things. I'm going to try to keep it fairly short so that there's lots of room for Q&A, but also interrupt me anytime. Anytime there's a question or I don't go over something in enough detail or whatever. Let's have a conversation. So, all right. So I wanted to start out with some definitions of intersex, figure out what it is, what we're talking about. And this first one up here is from the Intersex Society of North America. And I'll talk a little bit more later about the kind of history of the movement. But the Intersex Society of North America was kind of the group that really kind of got things started. They started out in support and went kind of immediately into advocacy because there was so much need. And they were a pretty extremist, if you will, with like the way atheists tend to be extremists, like, we talk about it. Really, really extreme shit like that. And Hermaphrodites with Attitude was actually the first video they put together, and used a word that is very controversial and really were out there. ISNA disbanded a couple of years ago, and kind of lives on, and we'll talk about that some more. But I just wanted to kind of start with ISNA's definition. And I guess I can read it real quick. Intersex is a general term used for a variety of conditions in which a person is born with a reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't seem to fit the typical definitions of female or male. For example, a person might be born appearing to be female on the outside, but having mostly male typical anatomy on the inside. Or a person may be born with genitals that seem to be in between the usual male and female types. For example, a girl may be born with a noticeably large clitoris, or lacking a vaginal opening, or a boy may be born with a notably small penis, or with a scrotum that is divided so that it looks like it's formed more like labia. Or a person may be born with mosaic genetics so that some of the cells may have XX chromosomes and some XY. And the reason I wanted to bring this up too in kind of the history of things is you can see how desperately inclusive this definition wanted to be. They wanted to hit kind of every possibility because they were really just finding their voice. And like I said, this definition was probably written somewhere in like early mid-90s. And they were really, like I said, the first ones out there. OII, I'm not going to pronounce all of this correctly, Organisation Intersex International, I'm going to call it OII from now on, is a pretty big organization with lots of different chapters all over the place. Their original definition, I don't have a year for it, was intersex people are born with physical, hormonal, or genetic features that are neither wholly female nor wholly male, or a combination of female and male, or neither female or male. And they've updated that just recently to intersex people are born with physical sex characteristics that don't fit medical norms for male or female bodies. And so, again, just wanted to point out just how things are getting a little bit more generalized. There's a bigger umbrella that doesn't need to be as specific. This was pretty huge. There's a couple of really big points. I don't have the quote from 2006, but intersex has become a pretty big topic on the international scene, not quite as big or loud in the US. The United Nations Human Rights Commission has kind of gone over this a number of times and put some things together. I should have had these in a different order. The 2015 Office of the UN High Commissioner said that intersex people are born with sex characteristics, including genitals, gonads, and chromosome patterns that do not fit the binary notions of male or female bodies. And the Council of Europe in 2013, the Children's Right to Physical Integrity, and I'm going to be talking about that some more too, said the term intersex refers to atypical or internal and or external anatomic sexual characteristics where features usually regarded as male or female may be mixed to some degree. This is a naturally occurring variation in humans and not a medical condition. It is to be distinguished from transsexuality, a phenomenon where someone has an evident sex but feels as if he or she belongs to the other sex and is therefore ready to undergo a medical intervention altering his or her natural sex. Again, I put this in here because I just think it's interesting how much discussion of things not intersex usually go into definitions of intersex. But it is a little bit tough to distinguish it. And so this final one is from the AIS-DSD support group. And I will disclose, I'm currently the president of this group, so I'm super proud of them. I'm really involved in it, and this is from our website. And I wanted to use it kind of as a jumping off point because it starts talking about kind of what we're doing and how complicated this is. DSD, which is, I mentioned the 2005 or 6 conference, we typically refer to it as intersex. In 2005 or 6, they came up with this term DSD, which is, in the medical literature, disorder of sex development. And this idea was to kind of classify it this way because intersex had that horrible word sex in it, and people can't take that seriously or talk about it openly. So they had to give it a new name. The doctors and the parents seemed to really appreciate the DSD term. Our community kind of went insane. We did not want to be a disorder because we didn't want to be ordered. And we prefer the term intersex. So right now this group is really treading the line, right? We want everyone to find us for support because we are mostly a support group. And so people who are hearing about their condition for the first time may be introduced to it as a DSD. If we ignored the term, we would lose those people. But we're not super happy with it. We have changed it to differences of sex development for when we refer to it internally. But anyway, DSD is a medical term for differences of sex development, or intersex. Intersex is also a term for biologically not having strict male or female sex characteristics. Having one of many differences of sex development is a reason this can occur, to clarify, intersex or differences of sex development refer to the biology and or appearance, the phenotype of the individual. Whereas gender, how the person identifies, or sexual orientation, who they're attracted to, are different things. And again, I wanted to bring this up because they are different things, and yet all of this stuff gets really, really combined into the discussion. So, after all of that, 4 pages of definitions of intersex. I kind of wanted to throw it out there. Do you feel like you've got a pretty good grasp on what we're talking about with intersex? I mean, it's basically what I'm trying to make sure everybody kind of gets is that it's an umbrella term for a number of different characteristics that people are born with. And a lot of the stuff is talking about phenotypes and what people look like. And there are a lot of intersex people born with bodies and genitalia that don't match what we think of as typical male and female, but that's not always the case. Sometimes people have no idea that they have an intersex body because the outside, if you will, looks like what they would expect it to look like, or within that variation that is very real amongst human beings. But it's talking about things about genetics, about internal organs as well, where chromosomes don't match what we consider the typical male and female. And again, we'll be going over some of the specific conditions that fall under that umbrella, and I can talk a little bit to them, but it really is a bigger term that includes really just anybody who doesn't fit into that standard. Yeah?
Come again with the AIS is?
So AIS, I didn't actually say it at all. AIS refers to one specific condition called Androgen Insensitivity Syndrome. At the beginning of the group's existence, that's kind of the only condition that we kind of supported. And so we were originally just the AIS support group, for women even. It goes into a lot of history. And now we keep it there kind of as part of our history. And again, most of our membership is made up of people with that particular condition, but we've expanded as well. All right, so when we talk about...
Is that the most common?
The most common, it is fairly common in under the intersex umbrella. I don't know about the most. I want to say Turner syndrome is the most, and then probably congenital adrenal hyperplasia. I'll go into some more of those kind of definitions, but those two I think probably have the most numbers.
Or hypospadias.
Yeah, hypospadias too. So the numbers are very, very tough to figure out, like what makes it up. Although we can talk about that for a second. Of you know, the numbers of people who are intersex in this country or the world, I've seen estimated anywhere between 1 in 2,000 people, and 1 in 5,000, and 1 in 200. Obviously, those numbers vary quite a bit. But it's really hard to tell because a lot of these diagnoses are not done, some are done at birth and some are not. And so a lot of those statistics do come from birth records where it might or might not be caught. And then, for example, AIS has a couple of different forms, but the most common one, I believe, is complete AIS, and I believe that I think the numbers there are about 1 in 20,000. There are some conditions that are literally 1 in a million. So, but it does mean that there's probably about 2,000 children born a year in this country who are born intersex, which in a way is a ton and spread out across an entire country, still fairly rare. It's interesting though because most people really haven't heard of this, and yet I'm trying to think there's a disease, I think it's spina bifida, I think has like an even lower rate, like it's 1 in 2,500. But anyway, there's a lot of conditions that we do know about that are kind of part of our common discussion that people have heard of, and yet this one has a little bit more commonality. It's not super crazy common, but not as rare, but is, until very recently, not very much heard of. So I wanted to talk next about how sex is determined. Most people basically break it down to chromosomes. You either have XX or XY chromosomes. If you have XY, you're always male. If you're XX, you're always female. That, I will go on to show, is not really as simple as it is. The other thing that a lot of people don't know is that almost all of the chromosomes that we are made up of have different markers that affect biological growth and things that we consider sexual characteristics. They're determined on different markers. So what the chromosomes mostly, if you will, and this is still mostly, are doing are affecting how the gonads develop. And so when the fetus is formed, we all kind of start from exactly the same material, if you will. There's undifferentiated gonads, and then they are affected and turn either into usually ovaries or testes. And that is, to give them credit, very much focused on that XY or XX. And then those gonads, as they develop, then pump out hormones. Hormones are really what do the work in our body, that make the changes that happen, that affect how things develop and what happens to the body. So they are in the large part produced in the gonads as a result of chromosomal stuff, but it's the hormones themselves that do the action. And I put this little graphic in here because what I wanted to point out is that the way hormones work is a lock and key mechanism. The hormones, if you will, are keys, and they are looking for specific locks in our cells, and those are the receptors. So when a key fits a lock, it goes in, and the hormone can have an effect on that target cell. When the lock or the key is in any way not matching, then they're not going to have as much effect on it. So I just wanted to bring that up as, you know, again, some of the ways that things are, our bodies are affected. It really kind of comes down to that hormone level and the receptors in a lot of cases. So, super quick biology lesson, even though I know this is the crowd who would love a long biology lesson. But as I mentioned, we all start out with pretty much the exact same undifferentiated parts, and then the parts get affected by different things. But for the first 7 weeks of fetal development, there's really no physical characteristics that can be observed that differentiate male and female. It's shortly thereafter that things start happening to the body and the fetus starts developing. The gonads start to distinguish at about 8 weeks. The testes, when present, will produce a number of different hormones, one of them being the anti-Mullerian hormone. And what that's responsible for is everybody kind of starts out with the ducts and tubes, if you will, that make up the uterus and the fallopian tubes. The anti-Mullerian hormone, when present, dissolves those or regresses them. But they really don't, they're different than testosterone and dihydrotestosterone, which have all sorts of other different effects. And the ovaries are producing estrogen. The reason I bring this up, and again, this is the super quick biology lesson, is in fetal development, what appears to happen more or less is that we are affected by the things that happen. There's kind of a default line that is, for the most part, what we would consider the female anatomy, or the female default. And it's, again, the actions of things like anti-Mullerian hormone, the effects of dihydro and regular testosterone, that start causing these changes. When they don't work, the body tends to develop more along the lines of an external female phenotype. We could obviously talk about this for days. But that's basically what I really just kind of wanted to leave everybody with, and kind of I'll return to, is there's just this idea that we all start out the same, and it's the effects of all of the combination of chromosomes, gonads, and hormones that really kind of affect how we develop. I mentioned that intersex is just an umbrella term. It refers to a number of different cases, and I'll just kind of go through the list and tell you briefly what I know about them, which in some cases is not a ton. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or CAH, like I mentioned, is probably one of the more common ones. And this one is actually, the genetics, if you will, match up. These are XX women, but they have basically an increased production of, from the adrenal glands, of androgens and testosterone, basically bathing the body in a lot more testosterone than is usually present in an XX body. There's also a component to it in some cases in which there's a salt wasting component that needs to be medically addressed. But what happens is that these CAH people, based on the degree that they have it, can be basically auto-masculinized, if you will, the same kind of thing that would happen if somebody took testosterone to, say, transition, is happening kind of naturally from what's being created in the body. And I'll just kind of stop there for just 1 second and mention, you know, when I was talking about how we all start the same way, we have this idea that men have testosterone, women have estrogen, and like, no, they'll never change between them, right? That's really not true. We both have, or everybody has some of all of these hormones. It's really the balance of them and the amounts that kind of make the difference. So typical male bodies do have some estrogen produced. Female bodies do have testosterone produced. It's just kind of the ranges that we see that affect a lot of the development and phenotypes. Okay, AIS, this is the one that I have, so this is the one I know a lot about. Androgen Insensitivity Syndrome refers to, androgen is basically a name for all the different, there's a lot of different types of testosterone. I mentioned testosterone and dihydrotestosterone. There's a lot of different other chemical combinations that make it up. They all fall under a term called androgens. And in AIS, what happens is there's the 3 forms I list up here are complete, partial, and minimal. And they refer to the amount of insensitivity. So back to that idea of the lock and key. Androgen insensitivity is a problem with the testosterone receptor in your cells, or the androgen receptor. If, with the mild AIS, it means that some of the locks are broken. Not all of them, not maybe even most of them, but there's less testosterone being processed by the body. In partial, there's some testosterone being produced, or being not, it's really not a matter of production as much as it is about usage of it. And in completes, it's almost none of those work, right? Like, it doesn't matter how much testosterone you put in that body, there's simply no receptors there yet. In AIS, the person has XY chromosomes, so what we would think of as typically male chromosomes. Usually the testes develop, but because they are not able to synthesize or use the testosterone, the testes tend to stay in the abdomen. They produce testosterone that the body then can't use. They do not have a uterus. Again, those anti-Müllerian hormones that get produced by the testes have kind of gotten rid of those. But a lot of the other factors that go on into male differentiation hasn't happened. So AIS people are infertile usually, and we have lots of like really cool superpowers. We don't get a whole lot of secondary hair growth. So like I shave my legs once a quarter or so. Disposable razors last forever. It's fantastic. Okay, maybe not a superpower, but something like it, right? Usually we have less, our skin usually winds up looking very youthful because a lot of the things that happen to your skin are more testosterone produced. So we tend to look younger than we are. So we've got those kind of superpowers and stuff. I'll talk a little bit more after this about my story and my experiences with AIS, but that's kind of the general. 5-alpha reductase is one of those literal 1 in a millions. And I'll mention again, sorry, on AIS, there is a defect on the X chromosome, not the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome works as it normally does, but the androgen receptor is on the X chromosome. So it can be passed down in a family sometimes, but given that there's 2 X chromosomes that come into, the mother is giving 2 X chromosomes, probably only one of them is affected, so there's a fairly good chance that the child would either be a carrier or not be affected at all. If it's paired up with another X chromosome, they wouldn't necessarily see anything except for basically being a carrier. In 5-alpha reductase, there's actually a defect on the X chromosome and the Y chromosome, which contributes to why it's so rare, because you have to basically have 2 people who have been similarly affected genetically by this mutation, or the mutation, and it's only when they combine into the individual that this happens. So what's interesting about this one is it looks a lot like partial AIS through infancy and up to puberty. At puberty, the testosterone that's kind of running around systems changes. It's a new form of it. It's like more of a dihydrotestosterone and one of these other versions of the androgens that I was talking about that the body has no insensitivity to. So all of a sudden at puberty, someone who has been raised female, might not even have any idea that anything's going on, is suddenly masculinized at puberty because all of those hormones start naturally happening. And what's, again, interesting about this is, like I said, it's rare, but in populations in which there's a small breeding circle, this happens more often. So there's actually a group in Haiti in which this is fairly common. They expect a good third of their girls to grow up to be boys, because at puberty, the 2 recessive genes come together often enough that they kind of recognize that this happens. And it's just become part of society. Some girls become boys. They move on. It obviously happens a lot more rarely in the US, but it does happen. Klinefelter syndrome is another one that I believe has some pretty good numbers. I don't know exactly what they are, and I never can remember anything about it except for the 47XXY. There's an extra X chromosome in there. So again, we have this idea that everybody is either 46XX or 46XY. This is one of those examples in which that is not the case. And I apologize, I'm completely blanking on what the symptoms or anything are. Swyer syndrome, or pure gonadal dysgenesis, usually results in streak gonads. And what that means is that as the gonads form, they kind of simultaneously are forming into ovarian tissue and testicular tissue. They're kind of a combination. And again, present fairly often a lot like androgen insensitivity syndrome for the most part, but there is actually a possibility of fertility in Swyer syndrome, which is really interesting. Turner syndrome, like I said, is another one that's fairly larger numbers. It's another version of gonadal dysgenesis, and these are people with 45XO. Basically, that second chromosome isn't an X, it isn't a Y, it's contributing, kind of. Lot of differences there. And mixed gonadal dysgenesis is another similar one where there's a lot of variation in there. Hypospadias I put on this list, and it does happen a lot. What happens with hypospadias is that in otherwise fairly typical male development, the urethra is not at the end of the penis, it's sometimes somewhere along the underside of the penis. Really doesn't affect too much, from what I understand, but our obsession with making people normal usually results in a ton of surgeries. Whether or not hypospadias truly belongs under the intersex umbrella or not is kind of a little bit up for debate, because it doesn't quite have the same characteristics as some of these other conditions that I've just mentioned. But we actually have started having people with hypospadias come to our meetings for support, because there is a lot of just feelings of being different, isolation, and feeling not accepted that come in there. I guess I should maybe move more often. Anyway, I just wanted to give you some terms just so you'd be familiar with it. There's a lot more conditions, rare ones. different mutations that happen. Partial PAIS, partial Androgen Insensitivity Syndrome, is sometimes referred to as kind of a bucket syndrome. There's a lot of things that go in there, and they don't bother to differentiate. Yeah?
All these then are considered disorders.
They are, I mean, if you use the term disorder as, yeah, like different from the typical anatomy or function of the body, then yeah. In these cases, something isn't happening the way it normally does for most people. Yeah. Yeah, so you see words like deficiency and things, congenital, things like that.
So that's not just a, excuse me, not just a medical perspective. The intersex community accepts that these are something like abnormalities?
I mean, we certainly have to acknowledge the fact that, yeah, this is not your typical, the way things typically happen. And that actually brings up what I wanted to talk about next, is like what people face with these. Is what we find in the medical community, and I will preface this by saying that I do think the medical community is usually acting out of a sense of trying to help. But their idea of helping is to normalize, is to put everybody back into one of the male or female box. And they usually are doing that and kind of reinforcing it, if you will, surgically. And it's fairly often cosmetic surgery, which when you think about it is kind of weird. We don't do a ton of cosmetic surgery on infants in any other case. Because putting children, infants under anesthesia is an extremely dangerous practice. And I've referenced before, you know, that physical autonomy. We just generally don't make decisions like that for children. But when it comes to intersex conditions, those decisions do get made a lot for kids. And it's again this idea of if they have a more normal looking phenotype, they will have a more normal life, which is what I think doctors think everybody really, really wants. We can talk about this. There's a lot of homophobia that is informing that. A lot of, again, just this fascination or insistence on people fitting into boxes. Yeah.
I have a question about the trans community.
Mhm.
It's my understanding that intersex people tend to face as much discrimination as trans people, and they tend to get lumped in together.
We do. It is really funny. I've done a number of panels and things like that, and I'm always on a panel with transgender people. And there's a lot of stuff that's overlap, and then there's a lot of stuff that's very, very different. And it's interesting, too, how the trans community has kind of developed over the years. Back when I was first kind of coming out as an activist, the trans identity, if you will, was this idea of somebody who was born into a body that didn't fit them and they wanted to switch sides, right? So they were looking for surgery that would put them into a different box. And meanwhile, I'm fighting for, don't put these kids into a box. Don't do any surgery on them. And in fact, there's even been a little bit of, again, it's just kind of funny. Trans people are fighting for the right to have their bodies altered. We're fighting for the right for our bodies to stay as they were.
Well, and there's a lot of other people that fall under the trans umbrella.
Absolutely, I'm just saying,
But
that was more the case 20 years ago, but yeah, I like where they're going now.
But something I've seen with the medical conditions is it can be helpful for them to have a medical condition or diagnosis so that they can afford, or insurance will cover the surgery.
That's absolutely right. If you have an intersex condition, a lot of those things where they say, we don't cover that, suddenly gets, yeah, it's kind of the magic thing. And it's been very interesting in the support roles because we do find wannabes. You know, I want to be intersex, and they have some really good reasons for wanting to be intersex because what they want done or the way they want to live would be helped along by that happening. So, and it's weird, like who wants to sit around policing whether or not someone's intersex enough to be with us kind of thing. Like it's really not what we're about. And at the same time, we are talking about a small group of very specific conditions, a very individualistic story that is really hard to find find your group, you know? I mean, we are rare. We're not just rare in numbers. It's rare to find an adult, especially my age. It's becoming a little bit more common to know about this stuff, but people my age and older, doctors did everything they could to hide the fact that they were intersex from the patient. I've met people whose doctor swore up and down that there is a fire and that their medical records were lost to prevent them from seeing what was going on. Parents who were told when their child was diagnosed as intersex, we're going to change the sex of your baby, your boy is now going to be a girl, and what you need to do is move away and never talk to anybody from your friends or family again, because they won't keep this lie going. And if the kid finds out that you made this transition, they'll be depressed and suicidal, and so your only hope to keep this kid alive is to separate yourself from everybody you know and never, ever indicate that anything happened. Just insane. But there really have been, again, traditionally or historically, there's been a lot of secrecy behind intersex. And it's the patients themselves who didn't know what was going on in a lot of the cases. And again, doctors who thought that they were doing the right thing by trying to normalize and give these kids a happy, healthy life, but at a price of, you couldn't know about this because this isn't something you could handle. Like, there's no way any girl could handle the fact that she's knowing that she has XY chromosomes. That's an instant suicide. Or worse, they could turn out gay. Gay or dead, yeah. Either way, no good. That kind of stuff, you know, with the movement, kind of getting the word out, the reason that I talk about this kind of stuff, and the internet has really helped with this. I think people knowing about this, people put the pieces together. Because, you know, the story of even like the person who was told to move away, you know when something's different. You know, we all have a good sense of our bodies, and again, growing up where your parents don't know anybody from before you were born is bizarre and is going to be stressful and is going to leak those kind of feelings. And I don't think it's an imperfect act of secrecy that is the problem, but the secrecy itself, that's the problem. And so yeah, it has come from this real sense of shame and like, this isn't something we talk about, and if it could stay hidden, then everything would be fine. And that is finally changing. The other thing, like I mentioned briefly, is the normalizing surgeries. They still happen today. You know, there's all sorts of restrictions on female genital mutilation in the world and in this country. They don't count if you're intersex. If you have genitalia that doesn't fit into that norm, then changing the genitals is perfectly fine in this country. It's a real weird exception. And I should mention, you know, again, we were talking about sex differentiation. The way sex is determined at birth is not genetic counseling. They look between your legs and see what you got. That's how it's done 99% of the time. Yeah.
For people who have been subjected to surgeries like that, when they're grown, in your experience, how do they feel about that? Do they wish it hadn't been done to them, or do they appreciate it? What's the most common feeling about that?
So this is where I have a real problem as the skeptic and atheist that I am, is that I usually want scientific data to back up anything that I say. And in this case, all I've got is anecdotes. And I recognize that. I do think, though, that there's some really great saying about a sufficient amount of anecdotes is data. So there is a lot of anger. There's a lot of anger kind of around the idea that someone's body wasn't good enough the way it came out, that it needed to be altered to be acceptable. There's, you know, a lot of people do wind up transitioning, going back to the, you know, the overlap with the intersex community and the trans community is, you are dealing with someone whose genetics and body don't fit this binary. And so, in a lot of cases, you're making your best guess at birth, right? That's hard enough. Then, when they surgically alter somebody and say, say the person had an enlarged clitoris that was kind of on its way to being what we would consider a penis, having that chopped off and then deciding you want a penis it's the worst, right? I mean, you were born with something to work with to go there, and someone took that away from you in order to present you and try to keep you going as something that you weren't. I will say I do believe that every single gender determination at birth is provisional, right? I mean, we are looking between the legs, even if we do a chromosomal search, we're guessing what this person will identify as. I don't think something like gender gets determined until you have the ability to communicate what your gender is. So I think they're all provisional, and I think we should all act that way. Leave the genitalia intact as they are, so that the person has all the ability to make their own decisions. In AIS, what happens a lot is those undescended testes are very often removed very early or in the teenage years because there's this fear of cancer. They keep getting told they're precancerous, they're precancerous, which I've yet to hear a doctor really explain to me how any tissue that is not cancerous is in effect precancerous. But we don't go chopping everything off in the hopes of not getting cancer in it. I do recognize that the internal testes, you know, the reason that they drop into the scrotum is because it's a heat management system, basically. So internal, they are going to be subjected to more heat. More heat can cause more mutations. Mutations can be cancerous. There's a higher risk, but I do believe that there's a lot that can be done through observation and checking and maintaining, basically, a good, steady medical watch on them, rather than just removal because they could someday be cancerous. It's an interesting one because a lot of people with AIS say, who had them taken out later in life, say they felt a complete difference. They were one person one day and then they were removed and they don't feel like the same person afterwards. And their sex drive might be affected, or their energy levels, or just their feeling of self. And why were they taken out? You know, like it was kind of a decision because girls don't have testes. You know, that's disgusting. Why would you have that? So these decisions are being made without a whole lot of information, and there is a lot of anger. And I think the anger is necessary. It's even good. You need to mourn what happens to you in life. But again, I do stress, and some of this is my own little thing of, I know doctors and parents who make these decisions are doing it out of a good intent. I think they're a little bit too stuck on this idea of normalcy being best for everybody. But I do think that's where they're usually coming from. So, what else did I want to talk about? Me! I love talking about me. So I'll try to keep this brief and just kind of share with you like my story. So I was born, nobody had any idea there was really any problems, just perfect little angel. But at 12 months I had double inguinal hernias, and basically that means that I had little tearing basically right here. And it's fairly common in infants. It happens quite a bit. When they went in to do the surgery, they were like, oh, now we know what's causing them. There are these, inguinal testes, the abdominal, the testes in the abdomen. Back in 1972, the term was not anything as nice as Androgen Insensitivity Syndrome. It was testicular feminization. My medical records show that I was a male pseudohermaphrodite with testicular feminization. They gave my parents basically the same kind of cancer story that they give basically all the parents and stuff. And they said, listen, this is what she's got. The testes will have to either be removed now or when she's a teenager, but they have to come out or she's going to die of cancer. My parents decided, hell, you got her open, go ahead and get them out of there. So I've never had mine. I don't know what it would have felt like to have them. I think it's an interesting question. But they did remove them back then for me. And I was born in the Bronx in New York, and I was taken to Albert Einstein Hospital, which is a teaching hospital in New York. And quite frankly, I was extremely lucky to be treated there, especially compared to some of the stories, the horror stories I've heard from other people. And through my childhood, I would keep going into the Bronx to go to this one place to get my medical checkups, whereas my sister got to go just down the street. You know, she could go anytime she wants to, but we had to make a whole trip about it, which wasn't bad. My whole family was in the Bronx, so I would get candy and all sorts of great stuff afterwards. At age 10, when I went in for one of these, and they would always like measure me for things, right? They'd measure my hands, they would do x-rays. There were some play therapies that I don't really remember, but I think people were really watching which doll I picked up. Was it G.I. Joe or Barbie? I don't remember a ton about it, but that was where I always went. At 10, they told me about this. They sat me down, the mature 10-year-old that I was, and said, you have testicular feminization, you will not menstruate, you will not have children, do you have any questions? And I didn't, because I didn't know what testicular feminization meant. I was a child and I didn't want any. And the whole menstruation thing sounded awful anyway. I didn't really think I'd want to go through that. What little I knew about it. So that wasn't so traumatizing. What was traumatizing for me was my mom was super crazy upset about it. My mom is one of the strongest people I've ever met. I've seen her cry like maybe half a dozen times in my entire life. And that one, she was fairly inconsolable. And so I really got the message, and I know this wasn't her intent or anything, I got the message that this is not something we talk about, because if this upsets my mom, this is super bad. So I was left with that, and that was something kind of a little rough to kind of figure out. And then as I started growing up and I heard more about testiculars, and I didn't want them to have anything to do with me, but they did, because that was the only term I knew. They gave me hormone replacements at age 12. At the time, it was Premarin, which is pregnant mare urine pills. I didn't know about that at the time, but I hated them anyway. So I did not do a very good job of taking them regularly. I had a younger sister, 2 years younger than me, who at age 10, when she was 10, loved to do everything I did. So it was unfair that I got to take pills and she didn't. So I gave them to her. My sister started menstruating extremely early. That could have been my fault. Anyway, she's fine now. But I did not take my pill. I take them on and off and stuff like that. And what really kind of started happening for me was this feeling of isolation. It was a really severe depression. I'm kind of really glad nobody in this room knew me back then. I think I was a fairly dark, humorless, angry person. I didn't really date anybody. I wouldn't take my pills. My mom would tell me, if you don't take your pills, you're going to die. I'm like, that's what I'm hoping for. So it really wasn't too much of a threat to me or anything like that. And to bring the melodrama to a close, at about 28, I was just done. I hadn't dated anybody in years. I didn't feel like this was anything I could tell anybody about, and I was like, forget this, right? What am I doing all this shit for? Interestingly enough, my family thought I was doing great. I'd moved out to Colorado, I was working for IBM at the time, you know, I'm like the poster child, right? I'd gone to college, I'd done everything right, but I was really miserable and didn't know how to talk to anybody about it. So in my own geeky way, I decided to write my suicide note because I was like, someone needs to know it was a testicular feminization that did this to me. And so I went and looked it up, and lo and behold, I found the AIS support group. And wrote to them. I wrote this crazy little letter that was just like, I think I've got this. I've never talked to anybody. Can you send me more information? And I get a letter back going, we'd love to send you more information. This is 1998. So they're like, but you didn't send an address, because of course you couldn't send it electronically. So I send that back, and I wind up talking with this woman named Sherry Groveman. We're on the phone for 4 hours. It was like the most life-changing experience I'd ever had to that point. I talked to somebody else who knew what the hell I was talking about. Towards the end of the conversation, she's like, oh, I wish you'd gotten in touch with us earlier. We have an annual conference, and it's next weekend in Chicago. And I was like, if I get to Chicago, can I go to the conference? She's like, get to Chicago, you'll stay in my room. And I did. I went back to work the next day and told my boss, Gary, I was like, Gary, I'm taking Friday through Tuesday off. He's like, oh, no way, I can't do that without that much notice. Gary, I quit. I will not be here Friday to Tuesday. And he was like, all right, fine, go do what you do. And so I did. I flew to Chicago. This was obviously pre-9/11. 4 people met me at the terminal who were just like me. It was unreal. Sorry. It really was. It was so life-changing. Found out all this information, got like a new diagnosis kind of, because I'd never heard androgen insensitivity before that. And I just went head first into the whole thing. These are all the conferences I attended. You can see I went the next 6 years without fail. I hosted the one in 2001 here. Back then I had 80 people who attended my conference. Thank you. And of those, maybe 30 or 40 were people with AIS. We just had our conference 2 weeks ago, which is why I wanted to do this now, because I'm still all high from that. Here in Denver again, we had over 200 people there, and over 100 women, men and women, actually, because now we've expanded our base, who had the condition. And we had parents, and we had medical professionals, and next year is going to be in Phoenix. So it's been a hell of a ride. It really changed everything to know I wasn't alone in the world. It's really hard to explain that kind of isolation to anybody, because, you know, I know everybody, I don't mean to say that I'm the only person who's felt isolated in the world. I know that's a common experience. But there is something just so fundamental about gender and sex that, that leaves you feeling really isolated and alone. But like I said, I don't do, those who know me, and you all pretty much know me, I don't do anything half-assed, so I go full in. I helped form the group and get our 501(c) status back then. I appeared in a Cosmo article, and yeah, Cosmopolitan. But it was a big deal at the time, because we were talking about some really real stuff. And one of the things that was really interesting is the person who wrote the article was just like, don't worry, I won't use your name. And I was like, no, 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 I want you to use my name. And she's like, you want me to use your name? Nobody uses their name. What are you talking about? And I'm like, this whole thing is about secrecy and shame, and I'm not doing it anymore. I was like, use my name or don't use me. She's like, ah, put your name in. So I called my folks up, and I was like, hey, I'm going to be in an article. And they're like, that's great. I'm like, yeah, I'm using my real name. They're like, you are? And I was like, yeah, you change your name if you don't want to be associated with this, but I'm doing this. Totally supportive. I did not need to make such kind of crazy-ass threats. But I was pretty high on the whole thing. But that came out, and that was, you know, that, and then there was a Discovery Channel. A woman named Tammy Harwell was living in Colorado Springs, got in touch with the group in '99, and they put me in touch with her. We became really, really tight friends. Went through a lot of soul-searching kind of crap. Back in the ancient days of '99, so we didn't have cell phones really all that much, right? We were paying like $280 a month each to have midnight conversations on the phone, 60 miles away from each other, for 4 to 5 hours a night. It was really an amazing time in both of our lives. Really transformational. Again, we hadn't really met anybody. We went to the conference together in '99 and 2000. She wound up having to move away in 2001, leaving me to do the conference on my own, but I'm not bitter. And now lives in North Carolina. But Discovery Channel reached out to us and wanted to do a piece on us. And the story was supposed to originally be about how we found each other and the friendship and stuff. They kind of tore it apart from that a little bit. But we were in this documentary together with a couple of other people on Discovery Channel. And that was a pretty big deal for a while. And I bring these two things up not to be all self-aggrandizing or anything, but I've met people who that's the first time they met or they knew about somebody else like them. And it was another one of those just like really affected some people's lives, and that was really, really important to me. In addition to helping the AIS-DSD form up, I was also on the board of the Intersex Society of North America, which was more of the advocacy group. And that was pretty exciting too. A lot of really cool work there. Went to like creating change and conferences like that to talk and give my story all over the country. But what I wanted to kind of end on is, for me, and I think for so many people in this situation, it's all about peer support. Like I said, knowing that there's somebody else in the world who's been through what you've been through can kind of just stand there and say, I get it. is huge. And so, yeah, I'm super lucky enough to have one of my best friends here in town is Noe, and we met through the group as well. And so we have like these little mini conferences all the time here in Colorado because we're close to each other. And there's a couple of other people in town that we get to see and hang out with, and I feel really lucky for that. This last year in Cincinnati, I went to the conference again, and as you can see, after a bit of taking a break, yeah, you'll also notice the hub got really started in those years. I was busy. But a friend of mine, Sam, who very interestingly, I won't kind of give her whole story away, but I met her dad in '99 in Seattle. He was looking for help at that time with his young child who had the same condition I did, and he was looking for more information, and we talked, and I was really excited. We were both going back to Colorado, and I was going to be like somebody's aunt, and like one day they were going to be able to talk to Sam and be like, hey, you've got this condition, but don't worry about it, you're just like Aunt Kim, it's going to be fine. And I was so looking forward to it. Family dramas kind of took that out of the equation for 15 years until she wound up contacting me through the group. And she's awesome, loves STEM to death. We live almost parallel lives. She just graduated with a philosophy degree. Could not be prouder. But Sam was ready to go to her first conference last year, in 2015. So I went with her to Cincinnati. And going for your first time, even when you've met some people, is hugely emotional. We do these shares that are super, you're telling your story to people for the first time in a lot of cases. And again, they get it. It's really, really, not traumatic, but just, it's catharsis, you know? Anyway, I went with her to this thing, and while I was there, some of the people I knew back from '09 and '10 were like, hey, we need you to be on the board. And I was like, yeah, I could probably do that, I guess. And they tricked me and said, and after I said I'd be on the board, they said, we need you to be president. So I became president of this organization. And I'm super proud of it. You know, it's been really great. I've just been doing it this year, and I'll do it next year too. And my big move with all of this, like what I want to be remembered for, or the imprint I want to make or whatever, is more, again, peer support. I want to make us more regional. I want to make us more than once a year. You know, I was saying to Noe before this, you know, it's funny, the hub has got this community of a minority group, right? You know, we feel a lot of times that isolation and we feel alone. Our group, if I want to be in a room with this many people who have the same, you know, are the same as me, I can only do that like once or twice a year, and I usually have to travel hundreds of miles for it. It really kind of changes the numbers when you think about it. Like I said, the most, I think, the biggest group we could probably get that we know of in Colorado would be maybe 8 or 9 people. So it's a very different scale. But I really think it's really important. So what I'm trying to do is figure out ways that this national organization can do a lot more regional stuff. And I think that's about all I've got. I brought up these resources. These are some places you can get some more information. I gave you all brochures from our group. We've got one for the main group itself, and then one that's, the second one is more about teens and when they first get their diagnosis, some things about basically how to talk to, you know, how to ask questions and how to hear that you're not alone with it. There's also, I brought some examples, I don't have enough to give out. Interact is a group, advocates for intersex youth, who've put together some pamphlets of what we wish our parents knew and what we wish our doctors knew. And if you get a chance to look through these, it's, I think, some really, really great points in there. I also brought a couple of books about intersex. Some of you may or may not have heard of this. Jeffrey Eugenides did Middlesex a couple of years ago, a big Oprah book about an intersex person. Total bullshit. But hey, we hit the top, right? So whatever. And I'll close on this. This is one of the things I'm kind of super proud of. This is a biology book, Principles of Life, that they put together. And they had a small little chapter on intersex. And traditional literature always had intersex people behind, you know, with these grids behind them, with their eyes blacked out, standing naked, hugely dehumanizing. And you can come up and take a look at this, but this is a picture from the Nashville meeting of, this is what intersex looks like. Me and Noe are in this picture. And I'm really proud that this is in there, because we've, I think, brought a human face to things and really tried to make people understand that we're people with all sorts of different conditions, strange things going on sometimes, but just people in the end. So that's my presentation. Thanks. Any questions, or I went through a lot of info.
I kept thinking of the rainbow
The rainbow?
representing the diversity of the human race, really.
Yeah.
And not just this community, but that there is this continuum of diversity that we find ourselves in many ways in different places, and in different places on this continuum at different stages of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just this year, this is the symbol for the group I got. It's an orchid, which is kind of our group symbol, because it's kind of this really beautiful flower that also has this kind of phallic kind of thing going on, so like it gets to play on so many levels. And then this is kind of a stylized one, and maybe this is easier to see. It's also, if you look like from overhead, it's 5 people coming together as well. So those are their heads and bodies and stuff like that. And I did one with the rainbow for the little heads too, because I love rainbows. Just mention that. Yeah, and you know, again, this kind of being intersex for me, I've kind of tried to explain to people is like the biggest little thing ever. Like in a lot of ways, my everyday life is not any different than yours. I'm still paying bills. I'm still, you know, getting through all the regular crap that we all get through. And at the same time, every decision, every part of me is influenced by this. You know, I have, I think, a fairly unique, I guess we all have unique perspectives. It's a little bit of a BS thing to say, but I feel like I am coming at things from a difference from most people. And that, I think, does really inform things. And understanding life living on a spectrum, that there are not these absolutes. And I don't think there's any. Because gender is one of those ones that I think we kind of grow up thinking that there are these absolutes. Like, you know, hey, death, taxes, and gender, right? We know there's male and female, there's boys and girls, it all works that way. Once you start breaking things this basic, everything kind of breaks. You know, there's no truth and lies, there's no good and evil, there's just continuums. And for me, that's spectrum kind of thinking has really been super influential, and I credit a lot of that with being intersex, with understanding that where I kind of fit on my own spectrums.
Well, it's such an interesting subject, and I don't want to take your whole life saga and turn it into like this academic, oh, it's so interesting, but as you were talking, there were so many things that for me resonated and touched on other subjects. Well, first of all, everybody's interested in sexuality, and so, you know, it's interesting from that point of view, but there are so many different things. Like, for example, I think a lot of people who have a more naturalistic, materialistic philosophy find it pretty easy to think of things on a spectrum instead of, you know, you're either here or here. They find it easier to grasp that. And then just the idea of truth versus lies, and how important and how powerful that is, and the idea of shame. And that when sometimes people are trying to help you, but it's painful because it can contribute to you feeling shameful, even though they might come from a loving place. And then the idea that instead of society accepting different kinds of people, we're going to shape the people to fit society's expectations. And another thing that made me think about that I've never really given much thought to before is the interplay between a culture and, like, we think of medicine as kind of sciencey and objective, but it's not.
Yeah.
That what we define as needing medical intervention comes from our cultural attitudes. a lot, and that there's, you know, that if your culture's at a certain place, then you just define that as abnormal, and we can fix that, you know, as opposed to if your culture came from a place of truly celebrating diversity, then in that imaginary world, when you got that diagnosis, they would have had a special party. And everybody would have said, what a lucky family. And what a different culture that would be to live in. You know, and also, if everyone could just relax a little bit about gender, you know, if the man likes to knit, just freaking knit, you know what I mean? Just like everybody just sort of, it's not the freaking most important thing about you. Like, if you met a person and you didn't know what gender they were, maybe that could be okay.
Right.
That would be kind of pleasant, you know, if everybody could just take it down a notch instead of it being number one most, we have to know that. I can't even relate to you unless I know that, you know? We have to have a pronoun.
Right.
It's everything, you know?
Yeah, gender really, you know, I didn't go into it so much here. Again, this does, I think, like you say, bring up so many different places that we could talk like for hours more.
You could, yeah.
And I'm always happy to. But you know, one of the other things that our group has done recently that I find really interesting, because I'm just not from that generation, is trying to be more gender inclusive, of making sure about people's pronouns and trying to, we always have now, we make sure the hotel where we have our conference has a bathroom that is non-gender specific, to make sure that everybody's comfortable and good.
Well, look, I have a question. Like, do you know any intersex people who don't want to be that have come to a place where they say, I'm neither male nor female, I'm both male or female?
It's actually really interesting. Just happened just last week here in Colorado. A person named Dana up in Fort Collins. I don't even know if I understand exactly what the court case was about, but basically needed a passport. Their birth certificate lists gender unknown because they were born with ambiguous genitalia and they didn't know at the time, the doctors didn't know what to put on there. And you have to be an M or an F to get a passport. And sued with the ACLU because they were being denied the ability to leave the country because of gender and stuff. So there are a lot of people who do identify as not male or female, they're non-gender binary. You know, whenever the census comes around, I always cross out male and female and write down intersex. But I'll be honest, I'm not so much looking for that for my driver's license. And the reason for that is, while I love to educate people about this stuff, if I'm getting a ticket or trying to get into a club, I am not in an educating mood. So, and I figure that that's the only time anyone's going to be seeing that. And so and again, for me, I think it's a little easier. Had some interesting conversations at the conference and stuff, because again, I identify as intersex. I don't feel like I'm any kind of typical female, but at the same time, I live in a world as a woman. I get paid less like a woman, you know. And it is part of my identity, but it's not a strong part of my identity either. You know, I won't wear makeup. I never wear a dress really, that kind of crap. And anyway, I was talking to somebody and I was like, I don't get it. Why is your gender identity, somebody getting that you're not male or female, or, you know, like if they make an assumption about you, why do you care? And the person said to me, you don't get it because you pass. And I was like, and I've been really kind of thinking on that for the last 2 weeks. Like, that's new information to me. Like, holy crap, I never thought about it that way. I don't know what to do with it yet. I'm still processing. But yeah, it's interesting because I kind of think the same thing. Like, people I'm close to, friends, people who know me, I want them to know I'm intersex. You know, it doesn't really affect anything about our friendship or relationship. I don't generally go into work proclaiming I'm an intersex software developer, because it doesn't have anything to do with software development. But again, you know, I was talking about the Cosmo article and stuff. You Google me, you're going to get an eyeful. I know a lot of companies do a lot of Googling these days, so I'm sure there's some of them who are just like, what is going on? I just wanted to know she had a criminal record. And she's a fucking atheist. Anyway, you take what you get. The internet wasn't around when I decided to come out. But anyway, it's interesting for me. So yeah, like I consider my sex to be intersex, not male or female. I consider my gender to mostly be female, but most of it is just an internal dialogue for me. I don't really care what people think so much. And like I said, I'm still kind of processing on, yeah, that's because it doesn't conflict for me. And what if it did? So anyway, just something to think about. Yeah, and then you had one too, right?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
It's pretty
Good.
specific, though. Is there any talk in the intersex community about like the evolutionary necessity of gender fluidity in the way that there is in like the neurodiversity movement with autism, saying that that's an evolutionary, it's evolutionarily necessary that we have these spectrums. That's what happens. So there's something happens.
Yeah.
Maybe this small subset, will have an advantage. Is that
I
ever?
have not heard anybody, and I would have totally tracked on that conversation. I can't think of anybody really kind of raising that point that I can think of. Have you ever heard anybody?
I think I've seen something just kind of anecdotally out on the web where someone was just like out on Facebook probably, where one of the support groups was like, hey, look at this interesting article. But I haven't seen any like serious academic discussion happening.
It is interesting,
interesting,
because like you
yeah.
say, there is something to it.
Like there's a reason.
Well,
There's a reason for mutations.
It's a good point, because there's animals that if there's too many males, they can change their sex in order to reproduce. So it happens.
Yeah.
Well, and we think of our parts as so stationary, but I just read an article, I want to say yesterday, that said that they now see a link for female orgasms in the past having to have like a mechanical purpose, and that the clitoris used to be a different place and it's evolved differently now to be more inconvenient from what I'm hearing. So having that diversity, I think, is a good thing. I think
It's really interesting. It's
I
another one
mean,
that-
gender is, evolutionary speaking, really recent. That's
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of a recent thing. So you would expect there to be this variety. So
Yeah, I mentioned like
I'm
the
curious.
culture in Haiti and stuff like that
Yeah.
with DSD. To your point earlier, there have been some cultures that do celebrate the person who is, the hermaphrodite or the person who's got that unique perspective of both genders as leaders and religious leaders and stuff like that. Yeah, and it's interesting. It is also, I kind of. Growing up reading the X-Men and stuff, I was like, we are the result of nuclear testing. This is so cool, I'm a mutant, where's my superpower? And it's just a shaming thing. But
I think that's a pretty awesome superpower.
No,
Yeah.
the last
it's not.
administration is pretty good.
Yeah.
But there is evidence that intersex people have been around since the beginning of time. This isn't any kind of a new development. It has been with us the entire time. So yeah, again, there's so many different specifics you could go into. There are families that have this like string of women in the family who don't have kids. And again, in previous generations, that was a pretty striking thing. Like, you don't have kids, why didn't you have kids? You should have had kids. But there's these infertile aunts and stuff, and in those families, there's a clear line of a mutation kind of coming down. In my particular case, it seems spontaneous. Nobody else in the family has it. I grew up half Irish, half Italian. There's lots of us. You'd think I'd notice another one, but it seems like for me it's spontaneous. Other people have it run in their families, so it's kind of all over the place. But yeah, I don't know if anyone's done any kind of real looking into evolutionary stuff. I will say again, we kind of, I mentioned that we really just have anecdotes and stuff right now about people who say, I wish they didn't have any surgery on me, I wish I was left to my own devices, but they are anecdotal. It's been really hard to get any real long-term studies done. We're starting to get some good information on children. In fact, like Noe works with the Children's Hospital of Denver. They have the SOAR clinic. They helped sponsor our clinic, our conference here this year. And they've got a really great multi-dimensional team that works with the families affected by intersex. And I think they're doing some really, really great work. We don't agree on everything. but a lot of it. I think they're really approaching it pretty well. But my point is, it's a children's clinic. You kind of age out, and then they've even kind of said they don't really know what to do next, like how to track these people, how to get long-term, like, hey, was being in the SOAR clinic 20 years later, was that good for you? Or was, you know, was that its own source of trauma and things like that? Did you have to talk about this too much as a kid instead of not being able to talk about it at all? We don't know. No one's really tracking it too much. We've also got people like myself. You know, I mentioned I didn't take my hormones because I gave them to my sister. I wound up with osteopenia in my 30s. I had the bones of a 60-year-old because I didn't have any estrogen in my system. I've been lucky enough to have gotten that reversed. I'm just on the edge now of normal bone density. But I didn't trust doctors at all. I didn't go into this with my story either because I was crying too much and shit. But I wound up, I was born looking fairly normal. I grew up, and as a partial androgen insensitivity, I am affected by testosterone, and I developed abnormally. The only way I kept my clitoris is by not going to doctors. I gave up my bones to keep my clitoris. I mean, it's a very real thing. So we don't trust doctors. We don't go to them. So there's not a lot of evidence out there. People don't know what happens to us. We do hide. I think we typically are really good at dissembling things. Like, I cannot talk about intersex as much as I can talk about intersex. Like, if I want to avoid that conversation with you, it will never come up. And you will never know that I steered you away from that conversation. Because that was a survival tool that I had to learn fairly early. So there's a lot of stuff going on there where, you know, again, the evidence isn't there because there's a lot of trauma and a lot of situations that have made that interaction between the medical community and intersex people very tenuous. I'll give you another quick story. This is about 10 years ago now. I was on a panel with somebody, and this guy was giving out this data that he had collected about his intersex patients, about how happy they were with their surgery. And I had just basically finished saying, I've been doing this for a couple while, I've met a bunch of people, I've yet to meet anybody who's glad that they had their clitoris removed. And he's like, oh, that's completely wrong. You got a few bad apples, you know, you just happen to meet the wrong people. I've got all these surveys that show these people are totally happy with the surgeries we did on them. And I was like, where are they? Like, can you produce one of them? Like, I'm here on my own dime, where's your person? And so as he went on to talk about it, it turned out he had all this survey data from people who had no idea they ever had the surgery. That didn't know their diagnosis, right? But he was asking questions about the success rate of what they did to them. I almost threw a punch at this guy on stage, which was not one of my better moments, but I was so angry. Yeah, he was asking questions and delivering data, scientific data on these outcomes that were still in the dark, that were asking questions obliquely because they didn't ever tell the person what had happened. So again, what kind of data you can trust out there really needs a lot of work. Yeah.
And then I was thinking too about what you were saying about getting so depressed that you were considering suicide. I'm just going to take a wild guess that that's not rare. And one hears that about transgender people and even to a certain extent about gay people.
Mm-hmm.
And it just made me think of that interaction between the culture and the individual. And it's kind of like, if you think it's not, but you know, think of the culture like this, totally cohesive one thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the culture isn't comfortable with this, and so they deal with that person in such a way that the person says, okay, I will not exist for you. You know what I mean? It's like the individual is solving the problem for society by
hiding,
existing.
by
By hiding is a version, and then the most extreme version
not
would be
existing
you're
for real.
going to take yourself out, then I won't exist, you won't have to deal, and the culture then won't have to grapple with the idea that gender isn't really binary.
Yeah, there's a lot of subtleties, I think, to that kind of thing, and those feelings do develop in these vacuums of not being able to talk about it. It's weird. Yeah.
Yeah, I just very briefly, Jerry brought up something that was the one thing about this evening that really smarts with me, and that's the need this culture has to label things, and particularly disorders. You know, I'm a retired mental health therapist, and having to use the diagnostic and statistical manual of just mental disorders just drove me fucking crazy. And you know, and when you announced this group, I think Jerry responded to what I posted there, that I immediately started going through the alphabet and thinking of adjectives and nouns that describe who I am. You know, because when you've heard the story, but when I first sobered up, I had a Buddhist monk friend of mine suggest I look myself in the mirror every morning for 10-15 minutes and say, James, who are you? And I made a list, of things there. Well, first of all, I couldn't look myself in the eye. But then more recently, because I told that story, I did it again. And the list is like 3 columns, I think the way I've described myself. But going through the alphabet and trying to find one word for each of the letters to describe who I am now, it was an interesting exercise because I hate fucking labels. I really do.
I love labels.
I love
that
labels.
list.
Well, you could maybe just make up one about me too. And
Well, you won't like mine. I'm interested in yours. But thank you for bringing that up. I had a comment in the question. I don't know how many times you may have told your story, but it always impresses me when someone like yourself is willing to disclose this much personal information. You seem pretty comfortable with it, and it kind of flows.
I could use a cigarette.
But it's, I admire that.
Thank
I just, and the question is, what conclusions have you come to from all the information, and all your experiences, and all your stories, and so forth and so on? The how and the when do you tell what to children about themselves?
That's a great question. Yeah, because I will say this, this was a lot in ISNA, and we still deal with it in the AIS group too. We are not advocating that, we do advocate that people do not have surgery on their children, especially cosmetic surgery. I mean, if it's medically necessary, sure, but nobody has ever died of an enlarged clitoris. It just doesn't happen. It's not terminal. But we do think that you have to assign gender to a kid, and as I kind of mentioned before, you're just going to make a best guess. I do think a lot of that has to do with go talk to a bunch of people who have the same condition as your child and make a guess, but don't reinforce it with surgery. But we don't think that, or I certainly don't think that children should be raised without gender, because we live in a society that has it. Would we ultimately be better off in a society that didn't? Sure, but that is not a 2-year-old's job. Like, we're adults. If we're going to make that change in society, we do it. We do not put that on children to do. But we give them the options to be able to be who they are and be open to the idea that this gender thing happened, or I'm sorry, their gender identity is something that they feel and will communicate in their own time. And again, and I have no problem with adults having whatever type of surgery they want to have for themselves. But I just don't think that that decision should be made for children. But as to when to disclose, I mentioned the story about Sam and her father and like this idea of how excited I was to be this aunt in this kid's life. And I think the support groups and the peer support that's out there, I think can really enable that kind of thing. I know that growing up, if I had somebody and they said, look, anytime you want to talk to this person, they're there for you. They're happy to discuss this. It'll be confidential. You can ask them anything you want. Would have been huge. Just to know that they have a life, right? To see them just interact, like have dinner, like, hey, like you walk, you talk, you can do all these things, but you're intersex, I didn't think, I thought I was the only one who mastered that crap, because again, you don't know anybody, you're living in complete isolation. I wouldn't dump it all in one kind of thing. We have a theory we call pebbling, where you basically give a little bit of information at a time, age appropriate. Talking about, that, I haven't raised any kids myself, so I don't really know exactly how I would do this, but, you know, maybe talking about if the child's going to be infertile, about how families are made in different ways, you know? Again, my life story is certainly bigger than 5 minutes or so. My parents did an awesome job. We had foster kids growing up. I was alternately the oldest and the middle child at different times in my life without anybody dying, which was kind of cool. And I never quite understood why we did it. We were a pretty poor family, and we really didn't have room for these other kids and stuff. And my mom told me it was because she wanted me to know that families are formed in other ways than blood. And I was like, that's fucking awesome. I think that's a great thing to tell kids. And those are kind of maybe the small ways that you can kind of start bringing that stuff in. And then talking about people being not always boys and girls, and, you know, like, you know, it got like, when the whole gay marriage thing was a big thing, like, oh, how will I tell my children? I'm like, just tell your children. It's not that big a deal. They're pretty accepting of these kind of things. But again, reinforcing that, hey, people live all sorts of different lives, and you can live whatever kind of life you want. That just seems like really good parenting to me. And I think over time, those kind of things come together. Another thing that I think is great with the peer support is we have kids who are as young as, you know, well, I mean, people bring infants sometimes who have just been diagnosed, and some people bring younger children who have no idea why they're there, except they get to go on vacation once a year, and they get to see certain friends that they don't see any other time. I think that's really great, is to get the peer support again. And then I think this kind of stuff happens when they start asking questions. Well, I have a baby. Why do I look different, if that's the case, or whatever? I think you just kind of have to answer those questions as best you can as you go along. It's tough, but again, I just think having that that autonomy of self, and not having your having decisions made for you about your physical body that you will want to one day choose for yourself, is more important than those awkward conversations. You know, the other one that comes up all the time, well, what about the gym, right? The locker room for gym class. If you look different, what are you going to do? And people think, well, cut off, you know, an enlarged clitoris so that nobody has to explain an enlarged clitoris in a gym locker room. And I'm like, yeah, high school sucks for all of us, and it will suck for a kid with ambiguous genitalia. It will. It will, but there are ways around this. There are things we can do. We can talk about it. We can find support. We can find ways around it. But eliminating somebody's sexual function in order to avoid embarrassment, or I can't have a babysitter over because they can't change the diaper because they'll know there's something wrong with my kid. These are, I don't think, adequate reasons to do the surgery and stuff. And so I think you just have to keep communication open.
I remember many years ago talking to a social worker about adoptions, adopting a baby, and she said to me she thought that the best thing to do, and this advice she gave, was for adopting parents to start using the word right away. And when you're holding baby and hugging and saying, you know, my beautiful adopted child, I didn't really dig deep on that and get a lot of opinions, and I didn't have the internet back then. So does that make any sense for something like intersex, or any way that child is different?
Yeah, you know, and again, I never chose to adopt myself, but obviously that was going to, if I wanted kids, be the way I would have to do it. And so I've thought a lot about the adoption thing. I would think I wouldn't want to hear it all. I'd want to know. I wouldn't want it kept secret from me, but I don't think I'd always want to be the adopted child. Like, I don't think I'd want to be constantly singled out for something I had really no choice in or any kind of involvement in. But at the same time, you know, I'd hate to be 18 and be like, oh yeah, we're not your real parents. Like that's fucked up. Like, why would you put that all at once? So I think it can be mentioned. I think it can be discussed. You know, again, families form in all sorts of different ways. We chose you. Like, I think those conversations can happen. I don't think, and I bring that up just as similar to intersex. I don't think I'd want to be reminded every single day, you are different from everybody else, Kim. You know, you're not going to be like anybody else. Everybody else fits into these boxes, you don't fit. I don't want to hear that every single day growing up. But I would have liked to have those moments that I would hope would organically happen, where you could say, let's talk about this, you know? Like I remember like just silly things like, you remember when they separate the boys and girls in 4th or 5th grade to watch that video? That's a great teaching moment because that was like super crazy traumatic. Like, what the hell is going on? I didn't go see the video, which was probably worse than seeing the video. Then my mom was like, "You don't want to see that," and I'm like, "Why am I the only? I'm out on the playground with all the boys. Like, what the hell is going on?" It didn't make any sense to me. Another one of those places where more communication could have happened. Again, like the SOAR clinic brings in genetic counselors and therapists and all these different types of doctors and stuff. And I think, again, having therapy for the family, having a way to talk about this in a safe place is probably good. But I don't know that I'd want to hear about it. I don't think I'd want to be singled out every day. So, yeah, it's a tough line though. All right. I said this would go to 9. We've got about less than 15 minutes left. Again, anybody who has questions about this, take me out for a drink. I'm happy to talk about this forever. And I really don't have any questions that I won't answer. But I do want to talk about, I'm sorry.
I just want to add one thing I picked up on the internet. You may already be familiar with this. October 26th is Intersex Awareness Day.
Mm-hmm.
And November 8th is Intersex Day of Remembrance, or Intersex Solidarity Day. Do you have any interest in publicizing those days? Or?
You know, we do that with my other group. We do stuff online. We've done like Twitter. What do they call them? Twitter blasts? Not blasts.
Tweets?
I don't know. There's some kind of the kids and the tweetings. They do something with a lot of shit on the 26th.
Like the hashtags or trending topics? Or?
Hashtag, yeah. They call it some kind of like.
Blast.
I never heard blast.
Yeah.
Blasting.
Okay,
Or
yeah,
I've
they
heard
like they
called,
just
yeah.
they're trying to make it trend on that day and stuff like that. I don't tweet. I'm too old for that shit. But yeah, I thought about doing this presentation in October, but again, National Coming Out Day is 2 weeks beforehand. And I knew I was going to be really high on the conference, so I wanted to do it now. But yeah, I don't know exactly what I want to do. The Humanists of Colorado, we talked about maybe doing this presentation as, or something like this as for that one, for maybe October. So yeah, but I haven't done a whole lot in the past, but I'm not sure what I'm going to do this year.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right, so yeah, I again really thank all of you. Really great questions. I'm glad you're all here for this first meeting. I'm excited for our next one. Like I said, the next one's going to be on polyamory. But I kind of wanted to just have a quick discussion about what you guys think about this. Like, is this something, one, that we're interested in continuing? It's obviously a new idea. And what do people want to see come out of this? Because this isn't my group or anything like that. I want this to be ours. Anybody have any thoughts they want to share?
You know all my opinions.
But we don't.
I shared all kinds of
Every
things.
single
We don't know.
Yeah, you want to discuss some of them?
When we did the initial discussion, thought it would be really cool to try and cover different topics every month and do a lot of kind of almost education in a way. Like intersex, polyamory. We wanted to talk about what did we call it? Invisible minorities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We wanted to maybe do one where, like, we were going to have this be kind of like an 18 and over so that we could really discuss anything we want without feeling about the kids kind of like it's too much. We said we don't, kids with parental permission, we would, we'd want to have a conversation and negotiate that. But we were thinking about having one about transgender children and specifically targeting families of younger children to have that conversation.
We thought it'd be cool to talk about coming out young, coming out when you're older.
Yeah.
The lesser or hidden letters like pansexuals and bisexuals.
Erasure.
Yeah,
That's
erasure.
the word
we wanted to have
Erasure.
one of our talks. We wanted to have how to be a good ally.
Yeah.
So
both
like,
in the community
the
and
senator
straight
cheats
out.
on his wife with a dude, and everybody goes, "Oh, he's secretly gay." Well, no, maybe he's bi. That's bi erasure.
That actually just happened to me this last week.
It happens to
The
me.
erasure thing?
Well, there was a rumor that went around my family reunion that I'm a lesbian, Robert's gay, that we're married to each other to be beards for each other, and that's why we don't want children.
Oh.
Ah.
That makes
That's
sense out of all of it. There
It
could be
was.
no other explanation.
I mean,
I'm
he
kind
does
of
have an
impressed.
actual beard.
You are a crappy beard.
Yeah. It does cause a lot of confusion.
I mean, this is
Oh.
good.
But yeah, those are some of the topics we threw out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really.
one of the things that was on one of your slides there at the bottom was peer support. And that, in my experience, is one of the most important things in getting over that sense of uniqueness, difference, and not fitting in. One of the things I love about the secular hub is there's a lot of people with very different backgrounds and very different attitudes, and politics even, so forth. And if I can find acceptance of myself in being honest and about everything, and then others are also, that is very, very healing. You know, and I've had a lot of experience with different kinds of support groups that help me to say I'm not the only one. You know, I hate being labeled ADD, even though that's what the books say I have ADHD. But you know, the people I'm closest to have this personality type. There's a lot of creativity and all that sensitivity and all that other shit that drives some people crazy. But it's okay to be who I am. Just like it's wonderful for you to stand up there and be comfortable being who you are, and with us. And I'm getting better with strangers about just being James or Jeff, you know. And so that's what I would hope that this alphabet soup thing could be, a place where people would just be real.
Yeah, authentic.
Expect it to be real and share our diversity.
For me, okay, so like, sometimes in my life I hang out with the lesbians and sometimes I hang out with the atheists, okay? But when I'm here at the hub of a non-gay environment, this is the place where I have most felt comfortable and accepted, and like, it's really nice. I really enjoy it, and I don't feel self-conscious or anything like that already. So I don't know that I really need a support group like this in this context. But if we are going to have such a group, I mean, groups are fun, it's great, I like to get to know people. I mean, I do like learning things, but as kind of, a lot of times at the hub, that's what we do, we sit and listen and we learn, and that's all cool, but that's like a one kind of personality, you know? But I would enjoy sitting around and socializing and meeting you all and chatting, and not always having that sit and listen structure.
Okay.
Yeah, just be.
I was going to mention one of the things that we do. I'm also the lead facilitator for Recovering from Religion that meets here at the hub. And one of the things we do is we have the topic for like the first hour, and then it's sort of like, we just kind of do our do. And I mean, that might be something too that we can explore, to where, I mean, depending on the topic. I don't think necessarily social hour is a great thing to do after trans kids. You know, those kind of things would be awkward and bizarre. But it's, you know, so, but I mean, certainly some topics lend to that
Yeah.
sort
And you have food.
thing. Food is always good.
I
We
like
should
that.
serve alphabet soup when we have our coming out stories night.
Alphabets we could eat, that
Yeah.
would be good, yeah.
Pretty good. Yeah, and I know I talk on, and like I said, you guys could be here till
This was
11.
a lot more complicated than some of the things that we're going to talk about, though. So I mean, it made sense.
I hope so. Yeah, and I mean, we did go over, but yeah, I agree. Like my intention was to do a little bit more of the social part and kind of combine things. So maybe we do just need a little bit more of a hard timer. Crap, bitch.
This other group that I'm in, they do this annual thing, they call it speed meeting. Anyway, it's like you have a subject, you have questions, okay? But you're like, you four at this table, 10 minutes, talk about it, then we move, and, you know, so, you know, you really.
Yeah, I'd love to explore that kind of.
Right, because I can't think what the categories are, you know, whether it's whatever system of categorization, but it's a certain type of personality that tends to go for this kind of thing, and a different kind of person, I don't know if it's left brain, right brain, or EMTJ, or extrovert, introvert, or what it is, but it's different kind of people who enjoy, you know, learning academically as opposed to interacting.
So we should maybe diversify the meeting style. Is that what we're?
Yeah.
Okay. Good, and like I said, like I'm hoping that the National Coming Out month, like October, would be more of that kind of, either, if it's a group this size, maybe we all do kind of tell our story together, or maybe this is too big and we separate into 3 or 4 tables kind of thing, and have more time to tell the stories. We'll have to kind of play it by ear, but I think that would be kind of a little bit more what you're talking about. Yeah.
In case anybody wants a field trip, I am doing a TED Talk in Rhino in 3 weeks on the trans bathroom issue.
Ooh.
And there's a bunch of other cool speakers as well. So it's on a Wednesday night.
Can I
but
cross promote it on the hub?
I would love that. I'll send you stuff.
Done. That's awesome. Good for you.
Yeah, let's have some conversations.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. Anybody else with
I
ideas?
had no
for-
idea what you just said.
I'm sorry, I've had a cold. I've lost my voice. I'm doing a TED Talk in Rhino in 3 weeks.
Oh, a TED Talk. Oh,
Mhm.
on?
The transgender bathroom issue.
Oh, excellent.
And you, if I'm not outing you too much, you work at the center, right?
I do. I work at the LGBT Center in Capitol Hill. Yeah.
So you're
our
for
inside
it.
person.
Do I watch this?
I would like to. I'm actually doing the Poly Talk next month. Cursing is okay. Is that a thing that we can handle? Because I don't want to have to change my slides.
I didn't even think about cursing on my slides.
It's like mild cursing. But it's
I really want to do slides with just curse words on it now.
I mean, if we're all over 18. and
Yeah, I
somebody
mean,
else is
that
offended-
again, I want people, you know, to know that, yeah, we can talk about anything here. We
Okay.
don't have to say the word clitoris, we can say penis, scrotum, we can say all those kind of words.
Fine.
No, I'm
We can
offended.
talk-
There is a door for that, okay.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wish more slides and presentation had more curse words, actually.
Yeah, they'd be better.
I just wanted to check and make sure that I wasn't. I don't want to be awful to anybody, but
No, good. Yeah, no, again, my main thing with this, and again, the reason I went with alphabet soup, like I've kind of told people anecdotally, like, you know, I hit a number of the different letters all over the place and stuff, and keeping track of them and what they mean today and what they're going to mean tomorrow and who needs to be included and who's been excluded. It's just a lot of work to me. So I just want everybody to be, like I said, authentic is really what I'm looking for. You know, I've also talked a little bit about, I kind of, and I think I talked about today with Kristen. She's doing a kind of, she's been scoping out the hub and like why are there more men than women in the secular community. So we had like an hour-and-a-half interview this afternoon, and we were talking about some of this kind of stuff and other things, and I've lost my train of thought a little bit. Oh, but no, I remember now. I was talking about how I wish our society had a coming out phase for everybody. Maybe if you came out straight. Maybe you came out like, hey, my folks got my gender right. I'm totally fine with this. I stick it with it, you know. And I like dudes like I'm supposed to. Like whatever, you know, like whatever that is. I think that Socrates type of thing, or that Shakespearean, you know, to thine own self be true. I think it's the most important part. And what I was talking about with her is how it's what I really appreciate about the secular community is that if not about sexuality or gender or whatever, people in the secular community have had to come out to some extent, right? They've had to make a decision to be who they are, to risk things, to be their authentic selves. And I do believe that that changes people. And that coming out process, I think, is very transformative. So I wish I think there's gotta be some interesting stories for, yeah, that cisgendered, straight person, heterosexual, no kinks person, probably still has an interesting story that we could all learn
It could
from.
be a brony or something.
What's that?
Like My Little Pony.
Maybe they aren't the most vanilla person on the planet, but they've still had their own experience of that, and sharing that, I think, and understanding that, because, I think there's, as much as sometimes it might be difficult to work with a kink that you have, it's sometimes hard to be like, I am so fucking vanilla. And this is who I am. I don't know. Again, we all have our stories, and to Jeb's point before, and Renee, you kind of said it too, and I think all of us really appreciated about this place, and what I want this group to really emphasize is this is just about being authentic. Just whoever you are, bring it, discuss it. I think we all have stuff to talk about. We all have stories to share. So that's what I hope this group's going to be, and we'll figure it out as we go. So I'll close it there. Thank you, guys.